Okay, thanks everybody. Welcome to another edition of Conversations with Dr. Cowan and Friends. And today's guest, I'm honored to have Stefano Scoglio. I think I may have even pronounced it correctly or close enough.
Well, no, but it's okay. I'm used to it. That's my American name. My Italian name would be Stefano Scoglio, but it's too complicated to pronounce it, so it's fine.
Yeah. And you know, I think everybody here knows who you are, so I'm not going to bother with all that stuff because I think we've seen it. Yeah. And I just wanted to say that the reason I wanted Stefano to join me today is people seem to be still confused about this so-called spike protein. And they keep asking me and saying to me, isn't it the spike protein that's the problem with the, quote, injections or so-called vaccines? And hasn't that been proven? And we're going to actually show a clip of Ryan Cole talking to Del Bigtree, who attempts to demonstrate that it is the spike protein that is the problem here. And Stefano has looked into this probably more than anybody that I know anyways, certainly more than me. And so we really just have two very simple agendas here. One is, do we know that the spike protein actually comes from a virus? And second of all, do the injections actually make you make spike proteins?
Yeah. Actually, very briefly, all the spike protein that is used in experiments, all of it, all the studies that use spike proteins, test spike protein for toxicity or for any other function, always come from laboratories. It's called recombinant spike protein. And, there's no natural spike protein for, and as I mentioned before, sometimes when I make my argument, which I will make about the fact that this mRNA, synthetic mRNA, is completely unable to enter cells and to produce anything for reasons that are very evident in the scientific literature, they object to me saying, oh, well, yeah, but, there's so much literature showing that spike protein is toxic. And I always say, yeah, there's about 18 articles that you find in PubMed. And you go and look at each of them, and all of them are recombinant spike protein. So I'm saying you've vaccinated 1 billion people in the world. There's at 5 liters per person, you have tons of spike protein you should have in the blood of these people. Why don't you go and don't recover it from one of them? Because, isolation of proteins is actually something that is done routinely. Okay, so why don't you do that? And you always use the spike protein from laboratory. That in itself, I think, should be enough of a proof that the only spike protein that there is synthetic, is lab made. In terms of ability of being able to enter the cell and produce the spike protein, I have in my book, which is unfortunately only in Italian, it's called A Pandemics, all the bibliographical references of people, the top researchers in the field of mRNA technology, which in articles going up to 2020, 2021, say very clearly, this I synthesize. If you want, I can even read some quotes, but synthesizing, they say, this mRNA technology has great potential, but up to today, which means up to the moment the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine came out, we haven't solved a fundamental issue, and that is the fundamental issue of delivery. We don't know how to make this cell and this material enter the cell. And they quote 5 elements because they, one of the reasons why they put these synthetic lipids around the mRNA is to favor an easier entry into the cell. But these researchers are saying there's 5 factors that prevent the entry of the mRNA in the cell. First,
Stefano, can I stop you for a minute here? Just to give our listeners some context. I think the theory that you're talking about is that you can inject a person with a synthetic mRNA, and that will result in that mRNA getting into the cell and making that recipient produce spike proteins, which will, they say, give you immunity, or you'll make antibodies against that spike protein. And the sort of COVID dissenters or the vaccine dissenters, they say that spike protein that you make acts as a toxin. So those are the two different opinions. One is that the making the spike protein is a good thing, and the other saying making the spike protein is a bad thing, but both agree that you're going to make spike protein.
Right.
And what we're, particularly you, and I 100% agree with you, of course, is there is no evidence even for that step is actually true. That's the problematic step, not what happens to the spike protein after it's made. Nothing happens after it's made because it's not made.
It's not made, and not only does all the literature before, but there's also proof afterwards of that. So it's not just that there's no proof that happens, meaning the mRNA goes into the ribosomes, and the ribosomes are instructed to produce the spike protein. Not only there's no proof that happens, there's actually a strong proof that doesn't happen, because, as I said, all the literature are claiming these 5 factors, and the 5 factors are extracellular ribonucleases. Those are enzymes that attack any foreign genetic material, and actually, they attack you immediately after you inject it. Assuming that it survives, I actually make a very simple numerical example. They inject 30 microliters of mRNA, let's say. Now, let's say that half of it survives the attack of the extracellular ribonucleases. Now they have to enter the cell. These people here, researchers are saying, this is supposed to happen through what is called endocytosis, meaning the lipids.
Let's actually just break this down. So the first problem with that theory is we have enzymes called endonucleases, which digest the RNA before it even has a chance to get in the cell.
Yes, absolutely. As soon as you inject it, it's attacked by the ribonucleases, which degrade the mRNA.
Okay, that's the first step. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then let's say, it's 50% survives that, just as an hypothesis. It has to get into the cell, and that's done with what is called endocytosis, meaning the cell is supposed to make some kind of invagination, where it brings in the lipids, right? Now, this you find in the literature, researchers were saying, yes, in theory, that's true, but very often endocytosis actually turns into exocytosis, meaning the cell makes an invagination to keep it out, okay? So let's assume that this is the second hurdle, okay? And let's assume that, half of it, 7.5 milligrams at this point, enter the cell, okay?
Okay, now, so the second problem is they postulate there's this process called endocytosis that will bring it in, but A, there's no proof that happens, and B, there is evidence that it happens in the reverse, which means there's exocytosis, which means it actually brings the whatever RNA out of the cell, not into the cell.
Exactly. So let's assume that we're down to 7.5 micrograms entering the cells, which we'll see that doesn't even happen for the 5th and most important element. But let's assume that. All the researchers agree that there's a system inside the cell, which is called endosome lysosomes, okay, that attack, degrade, and expel more than 98% of whatever enters. You find this in the literature. Guilleron, that actually studied this and concluded with everybody agreeing this, that endosome-lysosome system attacks, degrades, and expels more than 98% of whatever enters. So this is the third big problem.
Okay. So the third one is assuming, which is not actually proven, that some of this mRNA enters the cell. It is 98% of it or so is actually degraded by enzymes within the cell, whose job it is to essentially surveil and get rid of this foreign genetic material.
Exactly. Now, let's assume you've got like less than 1 microgram still there in the cell because it survives this attack of endosome, lysosome. There's the fourth element, which are endocellular ribonucleases. The same enzymes that degrade foreign genetic material outside of the cell are also inside the cell and dispose of whatever left very easily.
Got it. So we have a fourth principle, which is in the unlikely event it survived the first three, we actually have the same degrading enzymes in our cells to get rid of these foreign RNA particles in our cells.
Exactly. And now we come to the real situation, which is the fifth element quoted by this scientific literature. And that is the fact that these mRNA, synthetic mRNA and synthetic lipids are supposed to be highly immunogenic. Okay. In fact, so much so that they're called self-adjuvant. In other words, whereas in ordinary vaccines, they put aluminum, let's say. Why do they put aluminum? Because if you take that, whatever they call virus, which is that, blend.
Cellular debris.
Yes, cellular debris blend where they put the liquid of the patient into a cell culture and then they freeze it or whatever, and whatever is there. So the problem is if you inject that into someone, that's probably pretty disgusting material, but it's not toxic enough to raise any immune response. So since all the game of the vaccines is to show that there is an immune response for whatever reason, okay, then they put a poison in it, aluminum, so the immune system is actually forced to respond, and they say, see, through fake antibody tests, but this is another topic that we may discuss some other time, and then they say, see, it works. Now, for this mRNA and synthetic lipids, they say, no, we don't need to put any aluminum. They're as bad as aluminum in themselves. They call it highly inflammatory, demigenous, carcinogenic, they generate blood clots, they generate autoimmune response, lipodystrophy. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that are attributed to this very toxic material. So they say they're so highly immunogenic that they self-adjuvant, and they add. This creates a problem. The problem is we don't know what is the good dose, because if you put too little a dose so as not to irritate too much the immune system, it's too small, doesn't do anything. If you put a dose that may actually do something, that is so much irritating for the immune system that as soon as you inject it, the immune system attacks it, degrades it, and explodes it into, thousands, tens of thousands of particles around the body. And that's exactly what happens.
So in other words, as you say, with normal, quote, normal vaccines, they put basically the results of cell cultures allegedly produced at some point in the process with some unpurified stuff from somebody with measles or chickenpox. And even though nobody in their right mind would want to inject that into themselves or their child, it still doesn't produce enough of a reaction that you can find these repair proteins, what I call them, called antibodies. And so you have to actually put more poison in them, like aluminum and mercury and all kinds of stuff, so that you actually get more degradation, and that makes your body try to make more neutralizing proteins called antibodies, which are entirely non-specific. Entirely.
Exactly.
Now,
Absolutely.
with this disgusting stuff, they say, and I think attempt to demonstrate, that you don't have to put all that aluminum and mercury and all that stuff, because that stuff itself is toxic enough that it will cause a severe inflammatory reaction, at least in some people or a lot of people. And that's going to do enough damage to provoke this, antibody production response, which is what we think we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And so the point is, if that's true, and I think it's true and it's been proven that is true, that means all the next steps are probably not necessary, because the immune system attacks immediately this material and explodes it into, neutralizes it, exploding, not neutralize it, it doesn't neutralize it. It just explodes it into, an innumerable number of particles in the body. The reason why I say as it has been proven is because there's only one study on the biodistribution of the Pfizer vaccine, which I translated and attached to my book, which is it's available in English, and of course has been used through misinterpretation by those who don't want to admit what the study means. And that study looked, what did they do? They took they injected into the mice the Pfizer vaccine, and then they codified two types of the lipids included in there with this luciferase enzyme that it's actually luminescent, to see where it goes, right into the body. And what they found is that of that material that was injected, for one type of lipid, 50% was excreted unaltered, and the remaining 50% remained unaltered in the body and distributed in the body. For the other one, only 17%, if I remember well, was excreted, but altered, modified, meaning metabolized. But the metabolites that were produced were actually produced extracellularly, and that's why it was excreted. Otherwise, if it was intracellular, it couldn't be excreted. It would be part of the cell, right? So, and the remaining again found, the remaining 82% found unaltered all over the body, all over the organs. Now, what that unaltered means and why is key is because if the material enters the cell, of course, it's modified, right? Yes. It's degraded, it's modified, it's metabolized, so you wouldn't find it unaltered. And they found all of it except the one that was excreted unaltered all over the organs of the body, mainly in 4 organs, which are the emuntory organs, like liver, spleen, kidneys, and female ovaries. Those are the 4 organs where most of it was found, but it was found also in the brain, in the lungs, in the heart, everywhere, right? So this study, it's a complete confirmation of what I saw in the literature before. No chance of entering the cells. So these are just toxic bombs, essentially, that the body handles by trying to diffuse these bombs. Problem is that they go into all the organs, are deposited there, and as again an article in the literature states, is that these particles are so small, so infinitesimal, that it's very, very difficult for the body to get rid of them. So they actually stay there and form a first layer of toxicity. And that's why when you do the second or the third, you add the second layer of toxicity on the first, and it gets worse and worse.
Got it. So in other words, I think that the real message of that is and nobody should get us wrong. We're not saying these quote injections are safe or good for you, by no means. What we're saying is you don't need to make up an imaginary process of making spike proteins to account for every single toxic effect that is seen. The known contents of these injections, the synthetic mRNA and the lipid particles, are now known to be toxic in and of themselves.
Absolutely.
And that's all we need to know.
Yeah. I would add this. Sometimes people say, but are you sure there's only that, or there's only what is declared? Possibly there's more. For instance, the Japanese government sent back 4 million doses of Moderna because they said they found steel particles in the vaccine. So I'm sure there can be more. I object to the idea of graphene. In fact, I'm involved now on a big discussion, and I'm trying to make a video on this in English, and I'll send it to you as soon as I'm done. But apart from that, there can be other toxic material. But even the one that is declared, the synthetic mRNA and synthetic lipids, I mean, we're talking about PEG. PEG, it's the main component of the anti-freezing liquid that you put in your engine.
Right.
So how can it be good for you?
Yeah.
You know, so this is declared, as I said, they're highly inflammatory, highly edemogenous. They generate edema in all the membranes of the body. They generate blood clots, and of course they generate blood clots. Anything that is toxic generate blood clots. You know, blood clots are the way of the system of the body to, try to defend, to protect the vases from the toxins that circulate and capture them. The problem is if you intoxicate yourself too much, then of course you got too many blood clots, and that's a problem. But so they generate blood clots. They generate. They're carcinogenic. I mean, all that happens with this toxic effect of vaccines is explainable with whatever is included, is described as being part of it.
Yeah. And finally, before we get to this clip, do you know of any study that has actually demonstrated that so-called vaccinated people have more spike protein in their blood than unvaccinated? Not Absolutely. With indirect means by antibodies or anything like that, but actually the doable, easily assayed protein. We can assay C-reactive protein, albumin, all kinds of proteins. It's not a problem. So is there any study that actually shows that?
Zero. No.
Zero.
The only study that are there and they claim to find spike protein in the blood of vaccinated people are all through fake antibody tests. And by fake, I mean, as you mentioned, antibodies are absolutely non-specific. All the story, and again, very briefly, the way in which the fraud of antibodies performed is by doing these ELISA tests, only with one toxin. In other words, to show that an antibody is specific, you should test it with 5 different toxins, right? And then if only responds to one, you can say that is specific. But no, they never do that. They take the spike protein or the protein of any other disease, right? They test only that, and precisely because they're aspecific and they react to any protein, to any toxin, of course they will respond positive very often, right? But that doesn't mean that it's specific. It's actually a fraud. So I'm saying, you want to make sure that, or you want to be really scientific, well, start doing the antibody test with 5 different toxins with controls and find out if it's actually specific or not. It's not specific for one fundamental reason. You know why? Because why would it be important for an antibody to be specific? Because of memory, right?
Yeah. Because
the idea is that a new toxin or a new whatever problematic material enters the body, the memory is important so that the antibody reacts faster, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. Now, what is the time of a normal antibody, a specific antibodies, to adapt to any new material that enters the cell and that it's toxic? Less than a nanosecond.
Right.
So why would you need to increase that? I mean, if it's so efficient that in less than a nanosecond attacks any new material, having a novel antibody, having no experience, why would there need to be any memory of antibodies?
Yeah. Let me see if I can get the fraud thing right. So what they do to test for antibodies, they take one specific protein and then assay for antibodies. That allows them to claim that those antibodies are specific against only that antigen or that toxin or that protein. But the reality is, if they put 10 different antigens, you would probably get an antibody reaction to all 10 of them, in which case, the antibodies would be indistinguishable. And so you can't, so that demonstrates that there is no antibody specificity. And in fact, I happen to know of, I don't remember the name of the journal, but it's a neurology journal that the editor has said that he will not accept any papers that are based on antibody specificity, because the whole thing is basically a fraud.
Exactly. You know, an interesting joke is that when I told this some guy from a health authorities, from a lab of a health authorities, and I said that, you know, what the answer was? Oh, well, if you test for 5 different antigens and it's positive for all 5, it means it has all 5 diseases. I mean, so, you know, whatever you say or you do, you know, they do.
All right. I'm not sure if we even need to do this, but I think let's just play this clip to see what, and then you can stop me at any point and emphasize what the problem is. All right?
Yep.
So the first thing is, I did want to put this up because this was an interview that was done on the High Wire by Del Bigtree. And this is a statement from him. He signed it at the bottom as the CEO and founder of Informed Consent Action Network. And I just want to read this one line, that this is their bottom line: we follow the truth no matter where it leads. And I think if you say that, we should hold you to that. And hopefully Del will see this, and then he will correct what we're about to hear, because this was on his interview. So I just wanted to point that out and give him the opportunity to live up to what he was saying there. This is just to point out the second, it was somebody sent me this the other day, the most useful piece of learning for the uses of life is to unlearn what is untrue. And
yes.
I don't know this guy, but that makes a lot of sense. So let's take a look at this clip. Take me a minute here. This is on the High Wire show. Let's get to 1:14. And yeah, Stefano, just stop me whenever you want to.
Yeah, no problem.
And there's a whole lot of introduction about how much he trusts Ryan Cole. He's a pathologist. He owns his own lab. He's one of the main go-to players in the movement to warn people about the vaccines, which is that's a good thing, but for the wrong reasons.
Right.
And, you know, people often say, well, Tom, what difference does it make if you get if it's the wrong reasons? And I would say it makes all the difference in the world, because eventually it won't work.
You can tell at autopsy, we do see clots, but they're post-mortem clots, and they're jelly-like. They're not firm like these ones, and we'll kind of go into.
Let's get into the slides. You have a bunch of slides to go through. So first, I think we start with this idea of spike protein in the cells. Right.
And to be honest, I mean, at the beginning of the day, COVID was clotting disease.
Okay.
COVID itself, the spike protein from COVID, caused clotting.
Right.
But that spike protein, this injection we used, that gene sequence makes your body make that spike protein. Well, we know from countless studies we'll get to that the spike protein is excellent at inducing an unusual pathway of clotting. So we'll kind of get to this.
So to be clear, the virus itself can clot, but as you said yesterday, and many sort of backed up, they brag that the body's creating more spike protein through injection
for a
than it is
long
through a
period
viral
of
load
time.
for a long period of time. And there's also been a manipulation of this spike protein. We've gotten to some of that science here, but to make it last longer than it would naturally on its own.
Correct.
And now we don't know how long it lasts, you know, biopersistence and all of these things came up in the
those very
discussion yesterday.
concerning things. Yeah, how long does it last, and what is the persistence of a sequence in your body making a toxic protein going to do over time? So I guess we'll dive into the pictures and show some of those.
Take me through this.
Okie dokie. So this is, you know, the vaccine, little lipid nanoparticle has a gene sequence, goes into your cell expresses protein, and then your body makes an antibody to that cell. And then in the laboratory, now a cell that may have that spike protein in it or on its surface, we'll make a little tag antibody that will bind to it, and then we make it glow with different chromogens. And so here,
so you get kind of a dye that when it sees spike protein, it lights up.
it binds and then it lights up. Exactly.
Okay,
so that's how we can tell it's there.
Okay.
Present or not present. We can do this with thousands of different proteins in the human body.
Okay, great.
Okay, so here we go. You know, you were told this is an overlay of a needle going into a muscle, and you see that little circle is a venule. And you're told the needle goes in your arm, the shot stays in your arm, good to go, right?
Right.
However, there's tears in all these little microvessels. And we know good technique wasn't used, aspiration of the plunger wasn't done. So now this lipid nanoparticle doesn't just...
I just want to stop there, Stefano. If you have any comments so far, or do you want to hear more?
No, I mean, the whole point seems to me that, you know, they all take as an assumption that there's a production of spike protein, and then they attribute result to the spike protein. I mean, it's, you know, like they say, oh, you know, the spike protein generate clots, as if before spike protein there were no blood clots. You know, there's any type of toxin generates blood clots. So again, as I said, in the literature, it's clearly stated that synthetic mRNA and synthetic lipids generate blood clots like like any other toxin or possibly more. So what does it say? Where is it written that the blood clots is produced by the spike protein if you don't isolate, as you mentioned, the spike protein from the blood? I mean, this is as a kind of a dogmatic way to me of reasoning, right? I mean, I assume that the spike protein is produced, and then I look at the results. But the point is, first we have to prove that there is the production of spike protein, and you don't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just go a little bit more and see what we can
goes into
hear.
a pressurized blood system. And here's deltoid muscle. There's that dye. You see all the...
So do you know what they're looking at here? What is this that they're staining that they say is the expression of the spike protein in the deltoid muscle?
No, actually, it's the first time I see it. But again, why would it be spike protein? I mean, they stained. What did they stain, by the way? I mean, is this before the injection?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Not to mention that, I mean, whatever is brown there, it's got completely different conformation. So how is this spike protein forms into little balls, mid balls, big stuff?
In other words, there's no evidence here. I think what they're actually staining or putting in the dye is an antibody. So they're dyeing the antibody and saying that that's specific to the spike protein. And then they inject you with stuff, and the antibody goes to the site of the injury, in this case, to the muscle. And they say the antibody, it's all dependent on the antibody being specific to a spike protein, whereas as we just heard from you, and as we know, there is no specificity. So what's really happening is the antibody that fluoresces is going to the site of the injury from the injection.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, if you stained an antibody and you inject it, of course, you're going to find it stained in whatever site you injected it. I mean, it's self-fulfilling prophecy, self-confirmatory. I mean,
or any site that there's an injury, you're going, and then you inject an antibody, right?
So
those
So
dots.
we're looking at the brown spots.
The brown
The brown
spots,
is what the spike
yeah, those are
protein
all
is.
our muscle cells with spike protein.
Okay.
And that's what, that should be there if their technology is doing what they said it was going
Right.
to do.
Right. That's where you want it in your
yeah,
deltoid.
Right. Okay. However, we'll go forward here. Well, here's periappendicitis, inflammation of the appendix. Let's look at the next slide. See all those little brown dots? I'll be darned. That's spike protein in the appendix. Well, how did that get there?
Right.
Well, because that
Okay.
lipid goes everywhere.
Can I say something? Now I understand more. Yeah, it's exactly as you said. In other words, the point is these are non-specific antibodies, except they are stained. So you inject them, whatever problems they find, whatever lesion they find in any area, they go there, not because there's a spike protein, but just because there's a lesion or there's an antigen of some type, right? So again, the fact that you stained it before and you said that it's specific because you tested it with that fake test of one only no control ELISA test doesn't show anything.
Right. In other words, in order to make this claim, you would have had to have isolate. So the steps would be, because he's claiming this spike protein is part of a virus. It's a naturally occurring protein. In order to do that, in order to make that claim, you would first have to isolate and purify the virus, right? So now you have electron microscope proven only virus. Then you go and biochemically characterize it and find that you find this protein in those particles, right? Now you've proven that there is a protein called a spike protein. Then you show that antibodies are specific, meaning they only react to that protein, not to any other protein.
Right.
If you do that, then
through a controlled ELISA test, meaning testing it with 5 or 10 different antigens and seeing that it reacts only to that one.
Right. In other words, it's specific to that. In other words, there's no possible reaction to any damaged tissue, any other proteins, any other antigens. And if he has done that or can point us to studies, I think we would agree that that's true. But and I know how well you've looked into this, there is no study like that.
No, absolutely none.
Okay, I don't know if we need to go further, but let's just look a little bit.
S1 fragment of the spike, and the spike itself can circulate
so let's
for
hit
a
this
long
really quick.
time.
Let's pull out from this slide just to get this clear. You have this sort of lipid nanoparticle that was really designed, and you said this, and just to be clear, it was designed to cross the blood-brain barrier so they could deliver chemotherapy to people that had brain cancers. So this product was made to get outside of the system it's injected to and get to the hardest place to get
to the hardest places.
The brain that's usually protected from outside elements. And so when they wrapped this spike protein or this, this mRNA technology in this lipid nanoparticle and told you it's going to stay in the arm, that defies all reason, because the product itself was made to do exactly the opposite of that, which is not stay in the arm, to get everywhere throughout your body, including your brain.
We have 20 years of papers in the literature looking at this delivery device. They knew what it was going to do and where it could go.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. There's 20 years, and all the last 6 years of studies say up to 2021 that the delivery hasn't been solved. You know how there are some studies that have claimed to have solved it, right? But again, not directly through the antibody test, the fake antibody test. In other words, they inject the experimental vaccine. Then they say that, they did as this guy did. In other words, they inject an antibody that supposedly is specific for that, whatever antigens they're supposed to have created through mRNA technology. And then if there is that produced by the injection, then they say, oh, see, it works and it has entered the cells and so forth. But while they were doing these studies, and some studies have been published in this sense, still the top researchers up to 2021, they were claiming that the delivery issues hadn't been solved because of the 5 factors that I mentioned. So how clearly, whatever study came out saying that certain mRNA vaccine, experimental mRNA vaccine, works, wasn't enough to assuage the doubts of these top researchers.
So I think hearing what he said, there is some truth in the idea that putting an mRNA synthetic sequence with a lipid nanoparticle will facilitate that mRNA sequence poisoning your brain and your other organs. That part, I think, may be accurate.
That may be accurate, but I'm not so sure. You know why? Because although that's probably true in theory, in practice, there's that 5th element, meaning that whatever you inject is rapidly degraded by the immune system with all these instruments, meaning the enzymes and inflammatory cytokines and so forth, and is exploded and degraded. The particles that compose the vaccine are still there, but they are disgregated and exploded all over the body. So right. I don't even think now some of those particles will go into the brain, no doubt. In fact, even in the Japanese study, it has been found, have been found also in the brain, some of these particles, because they're small, so they easily cross the blood-brain barrier, right? And also being lipidic, they're absorbed even better. But they're not part of an mRNA system. They're just exploded small particles of what used to be a presumptive vaccine at the beginning.
Right. So just to be clear, it isn't that we're saying there isn't toxicity in the brain, in the ovaries, and the adrenals, and the kidneys, and the liver. Not at all. It's just not from this imaginary natural spike protein from a virus, nor is there any evidence that the mRNA is getting into the cell and producing spike protein that lasts forever and ever in our bodies.
Right.
That's the part we're objecting to.
Yeah, and if I can add something to what you said before, because of course this is something that has been said to me too, meaning, what do you care if it's spike protein or something else, as long as we all agree that it's toxic? No, it's very relevant for one thing, because I'm saying it's just toxic to whoever receives it. Are toxins that are exploding in your body, and you vaccinated person are damaged by it. With the spike protein, I've heard amazing stories of people infecting other people, transmitting the spike protein to somebody else. In fact, I've heard a recent interview from a guy from Italy, a doctor from Italy, who pushes this thing of the artificial virus and the spike protein and so forth, claiming that now we all risk to be vaccinated. There's passive vaccination, meaning the vaccinated person transmit the spike proteins to the unvaccinated, and so that is vaccinated too. I mean, this is a way of generating terror, fear, that actually feeds into the system that actually lives on fear. And that's why I think it's important to, show that it's crap.
Right. In other words, the way you get sick from a vaccine is injecting toxins, very clear mRNA, synthetic toxin, and lipid nanoparticles. It doesn't, it's interesting. The imagery of the spike protein is like a rape scene. It attaches to your receptor and then injects its business inside you and subdues you, and then goes on to claim its next victim. That's really what there's. And so the imagery of that, this sort of psyop, thing is, you're all going to be raped, and then you'll even spew the rape out to the next person. All that's just make believe. What's real is, don't inject yourself with these poisons. You'll probably be fine.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. And be calm, and don't be afraid, because fear is your worst enemy, and is the main tool of modern medicine, unfortunately, and all the system that lives on it.
All right. I think we've had enough of that.
Yeah.
And I just want to finish with, a lot of people say to me and probably to you, oh, that Cowan, he'll never be satisfied. No matter what you say, he'll never accept that, we're right. So I think we should, to Del and Ryan, be very clear what we would accept as evidence that you inject this synthetic RNA, it gets into your cell, makes spike protein, the spike protein lasts forever, and it's the spike protein that is the source of the toxicity. So what would we accept to demonstrate that that's true?
Actually, we're very easygoing, and whatever you ask is very simple. It's just that it seems to be that simplicity that is very difficult to achieve for some reason, because even for the virus isolation, we just ask you to isolate the damn virus, and not saying that, whatever you call isolation means cell culture, I mean, you twist words, you make, you make words mean the opposite of what they are supposed to indicate. And then you tell me that I don't accept it. Of course, I don't accept, because I'm a logic and I'm an intellectually honest person. So what would I accept for the spike protein? Well, find it in the body of the people who are vaccinated. Isolate the produced spike protein from the body of vaccinated people. It's not difficult to do, as you mentioned. Proteins are routinely isolated. Why do you insist in doing it through indirect antibody test? And do you want to do it through antibody test? Plan B, do the antibody test properly, meaning take the antibody from the serum of a person, test it with 10 different antigens, and see if it's specific for the spike protein and doesn't react to anything else. Then we can agree that it's specific, and maybe there's a validation of whatever claim you make. But neither of these two things are done. Nobody has ever isolated a spike protein from a vaccinated person. Nobody has ever done an antibody test with proper controls. So these are the two things that are supposed to be done, and that should be done by whoever wants to act in a truly scientific way.
Got it. And I would just add, if you want to claim, as he does, that this spike protein comes originally from the virus, then in order to claim that, we would like to see a study where they purified the virus directly from either a cell culture or the blood or mucus or sputum of a patient they say has COVID. I think I would even accept, sort of, if they isolated it from a cell culture. Let's see the purified virus, electron microscope picture, nothing but a virus, then biochemically characterize it, show us that the protein came only from that particle, and then we will accept that you have a virus and you have shown that the spike protein has come from that purified particle. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. I would only add one further element. Once you've isolated that spike protein, show me that it's toxic. Because one of the big problems, you know what it is that those spikes that are supposed to be part of the virus, those spikes, are actually part of the exosomes.
Yeah.
So there's pictures of exosome that have spikes. So it's even possible that in a culture that, of course, will contain a lot of exosomes, you may find something that looks like a spike protein. But then you have to show me that it's toxic.
Well, and you have to show that it came from that particle, that purified particle.
Right. That I agree with you up to what you said. I would only add, if you do that,
show that it in itself and only that purified spike protein causes any of these illnesses or symptoms that you're talking about.
Yeah. Also, because you see, I always underline one issue, and that is, why don't they isolate viruses through nanomembranes? There's nanomembranes through which they ordinarily isolate exosomes.
Yeah.
Why don't they don't apply that to viruses? Well, there's only one possible reason, because the researchers of exosomes don't need to prove any toxicity. If you actually isolate something that you claim is a virus, then you have to truly inject it in some, guinea pigs and show that it actually generates the disease. So they actually prefer to stay with this, isolation cell culture and go on with that, and don't do any true nanomembrane isolation.
In other words, I think what you're saying there is it's actually simple, not simple, but scientifically doable, easily, and being done to isolate things of that size and that complexity and keep them intact, so that you would be able to demonstrate then toxicity of that particle that you've then isolated. And the reason they don't do that is not because of technical difficulties, but I don't know why, but presumably because they know the answer would be there's nothing there and it doesn't do anything.
They would just be exosomes, meaning particles that have no toxic activity. Now, I'm not sure, I want to specify, I'm not sure that actually that system works and leaves the particle intact. I only read some of the literature of exosomes, and I see that they actually claim to filter whole exosome through these nano membranes, right? Nanofilters. So I'm saying, if it's done in the world of exosomes, since there's literature claiming, official literature stating that exosome and viruses have the same size, the same volume, the same, almost the same function, and so forth, and there's no way, there's no technology, this is an article 2017, there's no technology to distinguish the one from the other, then if you isolate, you claim to filter exosome through these nanofilters, why don't you do it with viruses and then show that it's actually toxic and fulfill that magical, never fulfilled Koch postulate?
Yeah. I mean, the difference here, just for people to be clear, is a virus is said to come from the outside. It's exogenous. Whereas an exosome is one of the many essentially endogenously produced, particles that come from the breakdown of the cells. Right. So it's, I've said for a while, in the beginning, they said all these particles are from the outside, and then they've moved and they say, well, now there's some from the inside and some from the outside. Right. And in 50 years, they're going to say, yeah, well, they're all from the inside. Never mind.
Exactly. Yeah. Hopefully we'll still be here in 50 years.
Yeah, maybe we'll still be. All right, Stefano, it's always a pleasure.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it was great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and happy holidays, and we will send you the link if you want to do anything with it when it's
absolutely done. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Bye. Stefano, thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.